Thank you, Melinda. She's only 2 minutes over the 2-minute warning, so that's not bad. So next, we're going to hear from Wendy Demark-Wahnefried, and she's going to talk about addressing accelerated aging, functional limitations, and comorbidities across the lifespan from pediatric to older cancer survivors.
Thank you. So I'm going to make up time because, as somebody mentioned, there is not a lot of research in the two extremes of pediatric versus older. So my title of my slide is probably going to be longer than my presentation. So objectives talk about the accelerated aging that occurs with cancer, the significance of diet and exercise interventions, and probably the potential for them, and considerations in the delivery of diet and exercise interventions to these two age spectrums. So if we look at significance and we look at young versus old cancer survivors, we see that if we look at the young cancer survivors that are on the left side of the slide, that the relative 5-year survival rate is very good, much better than it was in the 1970s. So it's over 83% right now. Cancer in kids is rare, thankfully. So there are, at this point in time, less than 400,000 pediatric cancer survivors or childhood cancer survivors in the U.S. They make up 2.5% of the survivorship pie. So the good news is that there's not that many of them. However, these kids have really distinct needs, and they have greater future life years ahead of them. So the significance is if we could really intervene in this population with diet and exercise interventions, we really stand to make a big impact on the rest of their life, which hopefully will be long. On the other spectrum, we look at older cancer survivors. Now, older cancer survivors, their survival rate is not quite as good, but still darn good, about 69% relative 5-year survival rate. There are over 9.6 million cancer survivors in the United States, almost 2/3 of the cancer survivors, and 62% of cancer survivors are age 65 and older. So there's a lot of older cancer survivors. They have shorter lifespans ahead of them, but because there are so many of them, that really does add to the significance. And both ends of the spectrum here as far as age are high healthcare utilizers, meaning that there's a lot more money spent on cancer survivors than in the general population. Now, everywhere in between is important too, but these are the two ends of the teeter-totter, if you will. If we look at late effects of cancer, really many of these sequelae are common between younger cancer survivors and older cancer survivors. And there was a really nice review, very brief review by Henderson that was in the ASCO education book just a few years ago. And you see all the things that are listed here. It is really sobering to know what cancer survivors are up against. I have underlined and then the ones that have been shown to be responsive to exercise or to diet, and have bolded the ones that really are more relevant to today's conversation. So even though cardiomyopathy, there's some evidence to suggest that if you watch the electrolytes in your diet, sodium in particular, that you might be able to affect cardiomyopathy. But we're really talking about the things in bold. So sarcopenia, fatigue, second cancers, which second cancers are the most common diagnosis of cancer in this country. And so it's really very prevalent. Obesity, metabolic syndrome, osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, and stroke. So talk a little bit about there. Now, so diet and exercise are important. But what are the adherence to the guidelines that are out there? Well, if we look at obesity, overweight and obesity, and the prevalence of that in our childhood cancer survivors, and we look at childhood cancer survivors as a whole, We do not see an increased prevalence of obesity in that population. However, there are certain subsets where obesity is very prevalent, and that is in children that have been diagnosed with brain cancer that get intracranial radiation, as well as children that have ALL. So these are cancers where obesity is very common. Now, that's not to say that there's not a higher risk of sarcopenia across the board. So body composition, and that's a point that was brought up in this morning's conversations, is very important. And really, even though we're not seeing obesity by BMI standards, we are seeing adverse body composition changes across the board. When we look at kids that have been diagnosed with cancer, the majority are suboptimally active, 54 to 84%, depending upon what study you read, and 40% to 70% have suboptimal diets. And so this is a population in need. On the other end of the spectrum, if we look at older cancer survivors, we see that up to 71% of older cancer survivors are overweight or obese. We also see a higher risk of sarcopenia in that population. And we also see that the majority of older cancer survivors are insufficiently active, 53 to 70%, and have suboptimal diets. Different sorts of indices are used: fruit and vegetable intake, whole grains, fiber intake, and see that 52 to 85% have suboptimal diets. So one of these really big problems, again, coming back to is sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass and strength. We all have sarcopenia. I'm sitting here as a 61-year-old woman, and boy, I can tell you, my thighs don't look the same as they did 40 years ago. And that's because I have thighs that are on like that end of the spectrum as opposed to this end of the spectrum. So the CT cross sections there show you the difference between a 20-year-old thigh versus an 80-year-old man thigh. And what you see there is the muscle that is depicted in the yellow is very much decreased with age, and that the fat, which is depicted in red, is increased. Now with that comes a decrease in strength. As Caroline Apovian pointed out, how we get our equations that determine how many calories you burn per day is not dependent. Yes, it is related to your weight and your height, but what it's really related to is your lean body mass, and that's how those prediction equations are really based. So when you lose lean body mass, you no longer need as many calories to fuel your body. And that's probably one of the big reasons that it's very important to exercise while you're losing weight, so that you can keep that lean body mass on board, and you can, once you get off your diet, it's not going to take one celery stick to have you gain 5 pounds. So you need to, keep that muscle mass on board. Almost all studies of individuals that are diagnosed with cancer show adverse body composition changes. When they really look at either DEXA, body composition by DEXA, by skin fold formula, or by total body water, you see these decreases in lean body mass. So we know that weight loss, when you lose weight, you lose lean body mass. And exercise can hinder that loss, or exercise can help build that lean body mass, keep it on board. So those are just some basic things as far as sarcopenia goes. Now this, I apologize that it's very fuzzy here, but I really love this graph that was, it's old-timey graph, 1992, but I'm bringing it back so you can appreciate it. It looks at frailty. So frailty is an insufficient reserve to recover. And we all become frail over time. So as we have the x-axis here, as we age, we have this downward trend toward physiologic capacity, or a kind of a trend toward frailty. Now, if you follow a poor diet, if you smoke, if you're inactive, you can actually exacerbate that downward trend, and that's what that solid black line is showing there. If you're not good to your body is not good to you. And the very first sign of frailty is functional decline. I won't just limit it to physical. It's not only physical, but it's cognitive and everything else. And once you pass a certain threshold, then you're considered frail. So you really don't want to get into the gray zone. Now, where if you've been diagnosed with cancer, that bumps you off your trajectory. It actually decreases your slope dramatically, and you're going to have to really work hard in order to get back on the trajectory that you were on previously. So when we try to prevent frailty, we encourage lifestyles that maintain neuromuscular control, promote muscle growth, optimize energy metabolism. Childhood cancer survivors, especially females, are put on this trajectory of frailty, such that their trajectory is much more compromised than their peers that don't have cancer. And females, as opposed to male cancer survivors, are on even a steeper trajectory. If we look at older cancer survivors, especially females, so we're seeing some consistency here, frailty, they also are frail. Now granted, they're further on down the life cycle or lifespan there, but their frailty really starts to endanger their ability to live independently. And this is why both populations it's very important to correct that advanced trajectory. Now, frailty is taking on a different phenotype. We always think about the poor little old lady that eats toast in her armchair, and she looks more like this with her walker. However, frailty is in the backdrop of obesity in the United States. The frail woman really is the one that could be in that wheelchair. So, and a very interesting study that was performed by Bennett on 261 older breast cancer survivors looked at BMI and frailty, and found that those that had the higher BMIs had much higher odds ratios of being frail than those that were regular body weight. So when we look at weight management, and I'm a dietitian now. I made my living being a dietitian for 10 years of my life at Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse, New York. When we put adults on a weight management or a weight loss diet, we generally follow guidelines that say that it's good to lose up to 2 pounds of weight of 2 pounds a week is generally what is recommended. Now, you can put people on very low-calorie diets, and we're not really talking about that here. This is the general run-of-the-mill diet. So when you do that, you put people into a 500 to 1,000 calorie deficit, and the protein intake is generally that you would follow is about 0.8 grams per kilogram. When you're talking about weight management in children, you don't want to push it that far. And the reason why you don't want to push it that strongly is that there's concerns. You put children on a diet that's too stringent, they have stunting, and they also develop sarcopenia. So you have to go a little bit slower. And oftentimes, unless a child is very obese, you recommend more behavioral approaches. You start to say, well, let's start to substitute water instead of soda, or let's start to have less screen time. So the lifestyle practice that you're endorsing is not necessarily a strict calorie restriction, unless you start to have a child that is really in an obese range. And even if that occurs, you generally promote a weight loss of around a half a pound per week, so much slower. And similarly, when we look at older adults, there's concerns of sarcopenia, and there's concerns of functional decline in that population. And if you look at the guidelines for older adults, the energy restriction that we promote is not as great. So not up to 2 pounds a week, but rather an energy deficit of 500 to 750 calories, and really combining that with concerted resistance training. When we look at physical activity, I think this article by Katie Schmitz has been pointed to a lot of times during this past day. We're looking at promoting physical activity of moderate to vigorous levels of around 150 minutes or more per week in the general population, resistance training 2 times a week, and to adapt the exercise regimen to the various comorbidities and cancer-related sequelae that the adults have. In that recommendation by Schmitz et al., there's also guidelines for who should deliver that and the certification that's necessary. And these guidelines have been adopted by the American Cancer Society as well. For children, the guidelines for physical activity, actually the CDC guidelines promote 300 minutes per week. So that they're higher, children should be more active. Strength training, I was really surprised to see this. Kids are not my area of practice, so when I looked at the recommendation and looked at strength training within a sports curriculum and supervision is what's recommended by the Pediatric, the American College of Pediatrics, but no strength training beyond that. And a review, and I'm really surprised that there could be a review in this area. One done by Brahm says that we really can't say definitively that exercise is helpful for children, but that it really childhood cancer survivors. However, there is a trend toward benefit, and that this is something that is associated with more benefit. Not really very many adverse events. For older adults, the ACSM guidelines for older adults endorse strength training 2 to 3 times a week. But we also see that despite that, these recommendations, there is benefit of light physical activity. Cindy Blair, who's right there, has done some studies that have shown that that light physical activity is helpful for cancer survivors, meaning that, well, we see benefits with lesser levels. And a review shows that physical activity is safe and effective in improving strength and function. I got 2 minutes. So when we look at delivery of interventions, we see that young cancer survivors are geographically dispersed. Old cancer survivors have transportation issues. So we need to find ways to get the mountain to Mohammed. We have to deliver these interventions in distance medicine approaches. Both populations are unaware of their increased risk, so there has to be increased education in that area. Low literacy is a problem, so getting interventions so they're understandable. There's functional and sensory deficits on both ends. Children may have cognitive deficits, and adults may have cognitive deficits. There's a need for large font, increased screen size, buttons that aren't really tiny that one could push, and adults may need training in order to become more computer literate. Both populations have value preferences for immediate gratification. So we all hear the quote, older people don't buy green bananas. They want to have their cake and eat it too, and right now. And so and kids, let's face it, kids are not really great at waiting for reward either. So we have to be able to provide a reinforcement that fits their mindset. Both have caregivers that we can help deliver these interventions with. For kids, game and play-based interventions may have higher preferences. For adults, they want to be older adults in holistic programs that mean something to them. And then we also, for both populations, really have to tailor on numerous treatment-related sequelae. So I'm going to actually talk really quickly about these two studies. So we do see, here's a really nice study that was done by Jenny Huang that looked at a diet and physical activity intervention in childhood cancer survivors. It was well received, but it was small, basically 38 people. But it was safe and it had really good retention, and some of the and it was actually helpful as far as staving off weight gain. We've done some exercise. We've done a diet and exercise intervention in older individuals. This study was called the Renew study, and I think it's already been covered, so I'm not going to really spend a lot of time, except to say that a diet and exercise intervention was really helpful in being able to improve, in order to decrease physical function decline in older cancer survivors. So in conclusion, there are several considerations when delivering programs to older and younger cancer survivors. Programs must address the health risks in this population. Probably one of the big ones is sarcopenia. And programs also need to overcome distance and well-known barriers such as literacy and functional deficits. And those, we hope to really have survivors like these two enthusiastic people at both ends of the spectrum. With that, I'll give the podium back to Lucille.